From the Media Broadcasting Center.
Jim and...
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where we're going to be discussing about the Rafael Cruz development with Ralph Cinque, who's made real contributions to what's going on here. We're getting our slide set straight. Larry, would you like to say a few words of background? Gary.
Well, I welcome everyone to the new JFK show, number 102. We've been on the cutting edge with all this, and Larry Rivera and Ralph Cinque have basically gone into the big time. They've made a difference in the presidential campaign. I mean, how big is that? So I'm just more than impressed about it. We've got a couple of pictures we're going to try to get in here. But Ralph, even though Wayne Madsen did break the story, it was Ralph Cinque that went in and found other images of Rafael Cruz in Dealey Plaza. So you can't make this stuff up. So what's
Larry,
your take on it, Larry?
We could begin with this old slide set while Chance is uploading the new one.
Okay.
No, Jim, I don't know if you're aware, but Wayne Madsen did an interview just the other day, and he talked about the whole thing and everything that happened. And he made what I think is a very important point. And that is that even if we didn't have any images, just from what we know about where Rafael Cruz was, what he was doing, and who he was involved with, he needs to answer as to whether he knew Oswald and whether he was involved in this, because he was definitely in New Orleans. He was definitely active in the whole Cuban dissident community. He definitely had CIA connections. And he has definitely avoided answering anything about how he was living at that time. For instance, he eventually started working for a company called Geocom, which is a CIA-connected company, but officially he didn't start there until 1966. So what exactly was he doing for income in 1963? He had a family. He wasn't divorced from his wife yet. They were... in other words, a husband, a wife, 2 kids living together and having to pay the bills. How was he doing it? So he has a lot of questions to answer, even if we didn't have these very compelling images of him.
Are you talking about when Wayne was on with Alex Jones doing an interview?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's when Wayne was saying that, look, regardless of what anybody thinks about the veracity of the images, Cruz has got some answering to do.
No, the point I make is this. Alex Jones has a big platform. And when you have someone with the kind of knowledge possessed by Wayne Madsen, it makes a powerful combination, because then you have very accurate and important information being disseminated by a very wide audience, large audience mechanism.
Well, what just happened with all this, Jim, is, in my opinion, historic, because what it is that the alternative media basically forced the mainstream media to address the story and to treat it as news. They certainly didn't want to. They wouldn't have done it voluntarily, but because of all the pressure and because of the way it was expanding virally all over the internet, they basically had to. And I'm looking at this very positively, because I think the same thing could happen with other issues and with a lot of the things that we say in the OIC about Oswald, that it could grow the same.
We'll talk about the old slide set, but Larry, could you send to Chance the new slide set? He doesn't. Could you resend it, because he doesn't know that he's got it? He's asking if it could be resent.
I sent everybody.
I'll tell you what. Let me quickly try to do it myself.
All right. Meanwhile, let's go to the next slide, Chance. Let's go to the next. Go to the next slide, number 2. This, of course, is historic for so many reasons. It's Lee Oswald outside of the Trade Mart, which, of course, was run by Clay Shaw. Anyone who's ever seen Oliver Stone's magisterial JFK knows that Jim Garrison was prosecuting Clay Shaw for involvement in the assassination of JFK, where he almost certainly would have prevailed in court, but for the unexpected death of 3 key witnesses who were unquestionably silenced to make sure they would never appear in court. On the very left, you see an image of someone cropped here. Typically, we have more of the image enough to identify this as Michael Payne, who was the husband of Ruth Payne, both associated with the CIA. where Ruth Payne arranged for Lee Oswald to have a position at the Texas School Book Depository and begin work there just 2 weeks before the motorcade would travel past that location. In the middle, of course, we have Rafael Cruz, and incidentally, Lee's girlfriend in Dallas at the time, Judith Berry Baker, whose name was Judith Avery, who was involved in research to develop a rapid-acting cancer vaccine with David Ferry and Lee Oswald under the supervision of Dr. Mary Sherman. So they joke about their names, Mary, Ferry, and Very, has identified Rafael Cruz as someone that she had actually met in New Orleans with Lee. And on the far right, the shorter figure is somebody I knew personally, Chauncey Marvin Holt. He was a counterfeiter, a forger, an artist who was working as a contract agent for the CIA when he was directed by his handler, Philip Twombly, to prepare 15 sets of forged Secret Service credentials for use in and around Dealey Plaza. When he arrived there to deliver them, he was supposed to leave them in a red pickup truck that was in the parking lot behind the grassy knoll, which was used by the Dallas Police Department, but it wasn't there. He wandered around Dealey Plaza, and he told me he saw more bad guys, mercenaries, and assassins than you'd find at a Soldiers of Fortune convention. He returned to the location. The vehicle was there. He left the documents, and in the company of Charles Harrelson and someone he knew as Richard Montoya, but who was in fact Richard Rogers, they headed down to the railroad yard behind the parking area where a boxcar would appear to be unlocked, but they were to enter it, and they found when they climbed in it was loaded with ammunition, weapons, and explosives. They would subsequently be apprehended by the police and walk through Dealey Plaza.
Excuse me, Jim, let me hear that email address again, please.
Say again?
Yes. Give me the email address for chance.
George at webookyourshow.com.
Okay. Thank you.
Were being escorted through Dealey Plaza. They were in the order of Charles Rogers in the front, very spiffily dressed, certainly didn't look like a hobo or a tramp. Charles Harrelson, the tallest of the three, who was a hitman for the mob and the father of actor Woody Harrelson. And then the third, although often confused with E. Howard Hunt, was Chauncey Marvin Holt. I'm convinced that had Oswald not worked out as the patsy, that they would have been the fallback because of the presence of the explosives, weapons, and ammunition in the railway car. But if we go to the next slide, this is one of the photographs we have to compare the image we find in the trademark photograph. And Larry, why don't you pick up and make some comments here, because you've done a lot with the photo comparison.
These are this is actually the man in the trademark next to Lee Oswald, and the one on the right is a latter photograph of Rafael Cruz, and I believe we've done a couple of overlays on these, and they, like I said before, they weren't really conclusive, but they were close enough where further study would have been necessary.
Right.
Well, if you go to the next slide, we have the Hands Off Cuba, the Fair Play for Cuba, a brochure that Lee Oswald was handing out when they were seeking to give him the persona of a pro-Castro communist sympathizer. Chauncey Marvin Holt, by the way, said that everyone in that photograph was involved in Operation Mongoose. And of course, we know that Rafael Cruz was in New Orleans at the time. We know he'd left Cuba about 2 years before Castro had come to power, but that he was fervently anti-Castro. And it astonished me, Ralph, that you found in the next photograph in slide number 5 that Rafael Cruz was also captured in Dallas on 22 November 1963 in a very famous photograph taken by a Dallas Morning News photographer. And Ralph, you may or may not know, but this was on the cover of my first book on JFK assassination science. It's Rafael Cruz.
I seem to recall that now. Let me say something about this, Jim. I think the location is extremely important. It's taken on Main Street, and he is obviously on the south side of Main Street. And it's pretty close to Houston Street. I don't know how far down, but less than a block. So he's basically at the entrance of Dealey Plaza. And from that position where he is, after the limo passed him, he was positioned very well that all he had to do was walk to the corner and then cross Houston Street, and he would have had a direct view of the kill zone. Now, keep in mind that if he was on the other side of the street, it would have been more difficult, because if he went to Houston, the motorcade would have been turning that direction on Houston. And I doubt that the police wanted any, spectators, dodging in between the cars of the motorcade. But since they weren't turning left, that meant that where he was standing right there, all he had to do was walk to the end of the block, cross the street, and then he would have been viewing the kill zone. Now, let's consider something, Jim. And I want you to know that I already resent the photos to George, so he should have them right now, and hopefully he's going to be able to put them up. But I want to point out that the motorcade was about 10 miles long. Rafael Cruz was not living in Dallas at the time. He was definitely living in New Orleans. I mean, we have that documented. And therefore, he must have traveled from New Orleans to Dallas in order to observe the motorcade. Now, that's not a very credible thing to do, because it's one thing to do it if you live in Dallas, but to travel to another state just to get a passing glimpse of the president is really not enough to warrant.
Well, I thought it was very discerning of you, Ralph, to observe that he appears to be standing next to the founder of Alpha 66, Antonio Veciana, right in front of him, who has a very distinctive skull and hair combination. Because Alpha 66 was among the most vicious of the anti-Castro organizations involved in assassination, sabotage, bombings.
Murder, right, exactly. The worst of the worst.
The improbability that Rafael Cruz would be in New Orleans with Lee Oswald handing out pamphlets in front of the Trade Mart and later show up in Dallas during the motorcade on 22 November 1963 and not be involved with the CIA, not be on the fringe of the conspiracy to assassinate the president, is virtually infinitesimal.
Hey, Jim, don't forget.
I agree with that. It's mathematically, literally impossible. Let me make a quick comment about the collage that we looked at before that compared the figure from the Trade Mart with a known image of Rafael Cruz. I want to comment about the source of the other image of Rafael Cruz. That is supposed
go back to slide number 3, please, Jan. Slide 3. Yeah.
All right. Okay. On the right, that image of him was taken from a promotional video of Ted Cruz, in which he was talking about his father having to escape from Cuba because of the oppression there and the tyranny. And there's a few things he didn't say. The implication, I think, of 99% of people watching it probably assumed that he was talking about Castro, but no, Cruz did not run away from Castro. He was oppressed and he was tortured and mistreated by our man in Cuba, whose name was Batista, Fulgencio Batista. Right. We actually brought him out of retirement to go back to Cuba to run it like our little fiefdom. And then eventually, of course, he was overthrown by Castro. But at the time that Cruz left Cuba, he was only 17 years old, and he never went back. Now, you can look at this man, and you can see he's obviously a lot older than 17. I mean, to my eyes, he looks like he's probably more like late 20s. And the image that's behind him in the larger picture, which has been cropped here, it kind of looks very, very barren, and it has a kind of a primitive look. And I think the implication was that it was Cuba, but it could not possibly have been Cuba. He wasn't in Cuba when he was this age. It must have been taken here somewhere, I presume. But in other words, what I'm saying is he basically lied in the picture and made it sound that like this was Rafael Cruz when he departed Cuba, and that was not.
Let me make one point before. Well, Chance switches the slide set, which is this: that on the opposite side of the street, on the corner of Houston Maine and Houston, there was a group of officials from the CIA who were paying their last respects. There's a whole website entitled Familiar Faces in Dealey Plaza that inventories how many assassins and mercenaries and so forth, but also CIA officials were in Dealey Plaza at the time.
Well, Jim, let me add to that, Jim, that if once the limo rounded the corner on Houston, which was just a half a block from this image, there were other CIA people, apparently included E. Howard Hunt, and there was another one whose name was, it begins with a C. What is it? Lucien
Conan.
Yeah.
Lucien what?
Conan.
Yeah, Conan. That's right. I'm convinced that was him there, the Lucien. They've tried to say that it was some postal worker, but no.
No. The claim that it was Robert Adams is simply absurd. Jack White blew that out of the air. Chance is working on getting the slide update, by the way. But I want Larry to take over from this point on because he prepared the slide set and got it. Here we go. This is transition. Larry, take over at this point in time.
No, this is the famous Walter Cisco photograph, one of the most detailed photographs that we find of the JFK limousine, and this was coming down Main Street.
Yes.
And like you mentioned, Jim, you've used it for the cover of your book, and other authors have also used this image extensively. And it was only a couple of weeks ago that Ralph noticed, scanning through the crowd there on the I believe that would be the south curb of Main Street, that the gentleman, that he's pointed out that we've been talking about, that now he's going to present more slides with more comparisons with different photographs of Rafael Cruz throughout his life, So I'm just going to, let Ralph take over.
Just in case anyone's in doubt, it's right there. There's a black couple. There's a black woman about the third in from the right. Right behind her to the right is Rafael Cruz, and right to her above her to the left is Antonio Veciana. This is really stunning stuff, Ralph. It was brilliant of you to make this.
Thank you, Jim. One of the things I want to point out as we begin to analyze this is that throughout his life, Rafael Cruz always seemed to wear these heavy glasses, these heavy framed glasses, and you're going to notice in all the images that we're using here to compare that he has such glasses on, and you'll see, obviously he's wearing them here in this picture. And I think that especially for such a young man, it's a little bit unusual for an event like this, to be wearing such glasses. I think it was his habit. Obviously he needed to wear them, but it represents, I think, a strong matching feature that is present in all of the photos.
Yeah, now, it was his habit. It was his habit to wear. It was
his habit. Let's go to the next photo and the next slide. Yes, okay. This is what I call the wedding photo. That is Rafael Cruz, and supposedly that's his wedding to Elizabeth Darby, or whatever her name was. What's interesting about this photo is that it has been confirmed that they did not actually legally marry at this time. They're having some kind of ceremony here, wearing a rose, but they don't actually marry.
Was she the mother of Ted Cruz, Ralph?
Excuse me? Yeah, that is the mother of Ted Cruz right there. Yeah. That absolutely is. There's no doubt about it. It was the late 60s. Now, you'll notice the very, very good match between the facial features of each of them going from left to right. You notice the heavy glasses. He obviously experienced some hair recession, and he, of course, eventually lost most all of his hair. He's another case of a rapidly balding young man, as we spoke of Lovelady. But if you look at all the features here, and I've looked at them, dividing them up into chin, mouth, lips, nose, eyes, that there is excellent correlation here for everything. And there's nothing that I call a deal breaker. I like to use that term because we're talking here about DNA, a person's individual DNA. And even if two people looked a lot in many respects, if they're not related, if they have different DNA, there's a very good chance that at least in some respects or one respect, that they're going to look strikingly different. But nothing is out of place here. There's nothing that screams at us that they're different men. This is, I consider this a very high level correlation.
Go forward with the slides. Yeah.
Go forward. All right. So here we have another one. Again, you know, and in this photo on the right, he's holding baby Ted. So he's holding his son there. And again, we're seeing very similar almond-shaped eyes, almost Asian-looking slightly. And again, he's got the hair recession because he was the rapidly balding young man. The ears match very well. The shape of the face matches very well. The chin matches very well. And even the tendency to keep the mouth open while he's posing for the picture. All those things, you know, match very well. And again, I consider this to be a very high correlation image.
Very good. I like the points you're making.
All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so here obviously we have the modern, older Cruz. And again, the correlation is very good. I'll point out a few things. Obviously, his hair is mostly gone now because he's old. His nose looks actually kind of bigger and puffier on the right. But keep in mind that your ears and your nose keep growing throughout life. That is a known fact in medicine. The cartilage just keeps growing. Look what happened to W.C. Fields. And so the fact that his nose seems a little bit more lumpen on the right is only because he got older, and that is what happens. But the mouth, the chin, the shape of the face, and the eyes, again, excellent here. This is, I've been doing photo comparison now for 5 years, and I consider this to be first class. I've never seen anything better.
You've gotten very good at it, Ralph.
Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, now in this one, in the lower right, you're seeing Ted there. I can only guess about how old he was, probably about 4. And that would make the age of the picture 1974, so it would have been 11 years after. Notice again that he's wearing those heavy glasses again. Now, I think I want to point out here that I would say most people have the tendency, if they're going to take a family photo, to take their glasses off for the picture. Even if they wear glasses most of the time or even all of the time, they will take their glasses off for the picture. And what I'm wondering about this is if to some extent he wore glasses as a disguise, if he just liked the fact that it kind of maybe just framed his face a little differently and just really had this strong tendency to feel safer, you know, wearing these glasses. But otherwise, again, I think the correlation, eyes, nose, mouth, chin, shape of the face, everything is very, very good, very first rate for that to be him.
Next.
Let's go to the next one. Okay, we didn't do this one. All right, yes, this one, I call this the man from space, because those glasses on the right are almost over the top, the extent to which they are just totally, you might say,
theatrical,
obfuscating.
Theatrical.
I mean, who wears glasses like that, especially for a photograph? Again, to me, this is paranoia.
Like he's hiding. He's hiding.
He's hiding his face behind those big glasses. And notice how he's constantly changing his facial hair. Sometimes clean shaven, sometimes a mustache, sometimes a mustache and a goatee. Changing it up, mixing it up, constantly trying to keep his looks obscured. But again, this works out perfectly at the rate that he was balding, that his hair would have receded that much. And the correlation of the ears, the nose, the mouth, shape of the face, the length of the neck, all of it is very good, very first class. Let's go to the next. Well, we did, all right, this is another one. Again, we've got the heavy glasses, big rims, top and bottom, big wide arms to the glass. And again, I want to point out what I like about this collage is how perfectly the smiles match. He had a very relaxed, open-mouthed smile, and you see it in several of his pictures. Some people have more of a tense smile where they just don't really know how to smile naturally, and but in this case, the smile matches very well. The nose matches very, very well. And he had sort of what I call slit-like eyes, where they weren't big and round. They were more kind of wide and narrow, and you're getting the same impression on both sides. And again, I think that this is another very, very good correlation. The ears match very well. This photo was probably from the mid-'70s somewhere. Well, again, probably 74 or 75, but that is a very good match to him. Let's go on. Now, this was more of a close-up of the face. I made this one because I really wanted to get the heart of the face. And what I like about it is it shows a very good correlation with the distance between the eyes and just the general configuration of the nose and the mouth and the
relative relation of the ears, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the teeth.
It's all very constant. It's all very uniform. And again, I find it to be just non-believable that could just be by accident, be somebody else who just happened to be there. And then think again about where he is. We're talking about being at the motorcade of JFK motorcade moments before JFK was going to get slaughtered. I mean, if we found a matching photo to him from anywhere, say from Times Square or from Miami Beach, it would be unusual. But to actually find it in Dealey at the entrance to Dealey Plaza, no. Coincidences like that, I do not respect. No way.
Right.
We've been using the term interpupillary distance since October, Ralph.
That's a good. That's a good interpupillary distance. Well, that's what matches very well.
Every time that we've been talking about the overlays in Doorman and Lee Oswald and Billy Lovely.
Now, this collage is actually one of my favorites because it's the one that correlates to him when he was younger. And
that's the Matanzas. That's called the Matanzas photo.
That's right. That's from when he was, I guess, it was a school photo from when he was going to school in Cuba. Yeah. But what really strikes me here, and this is where if you had say a plastic surgeon or maybe even just a pediatrician who really understands the maturation of a face, that what we're seeing here is just a perfect expectation of how that very young face, that teenage face on the left, would mature by the time he was, in his early 20s, as we're seeing on the right. I mean, that is really, really good. In fact, even though we're seeing he's wearing those glasses on the right, we're still getting a sense that the eyebrows over the eyes are perfectly correlated with what we see on the left. The ears are perfectly correlated. There is really just another feature that I've noticed in several of the pictures is that he happens to have a fuller lower lip and a thinner upper lip. And, people are very different that way. There's all kinds of combinations that people have, but he happened to have a prominent, full lower lip and a thinner upper lip, and Oswald was that way too, for instance. But we're seeing it on both of them. So again, the odds that this is somebody else who just happened to be there and look that much like him is just infinitesimal. Mathematically, to me, it's just so small that it's virtually non-existent.
Number 10.
All right, here again. This is that photo again that was taken in that was displayed in the Ted Cruz video, which described him fleeing, Cuba because of the oppression, and obviously that is not what the photo was. So that aspect of it was a lie. To me, this correlation is very well because what we're seeing here is the deep dark eyes, and we're seeing the nose, and the only thing that doesn't correlate very well is the dimension of the top of the head. We're getting more of a sense of a very, very slender head on the right, But let me tell you something, and this is just a suspicion. I'm not changing it for a fact. I'm not stating it as a fact. But I actually seriously suspect that that photo was manipulated with the aspect ratio in order to make his face look more horse-like than it was. To give
Well,
him.
you're not alone. That had crossed my mind too, Ralph, in looking at various of these photos.
Because I don't think
Some
that his
very
face is
subtle
ever that
form of
long and narrow.
distortion across the forehead.
Yeah, it does look fake. It almost looks like he has a toupee on.
Yeah. So again, I think that they may have manipulated that photo, but again, I'll point out again with the glasses, and here, of course, it looks like he's wearing sunglasses, but Rafael Cruz has been hiding behind the disguise of his glasses for a long time, and he was doing it in Dealey Plaza.
Well, I just wanted to say that this photograph is taken from a video clip, a very short 11-second video clip that was published on YouTube, and we have talked about this this particular portion of this sequence because we have noted that Chauncey Holt is in the photograph, and in the foreground, two gentlemen that are walking in front of the camera. We have already seen that their faces have been obfuscated. Okay, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that the area where Rafael Cruz is shown in this sequence might have also been tampered with.
Right, true, very true. Go ahead.
Yeah, next.
You know what's interesting about this photo is that just because it's an isolated photo, that I want you to notice that the shape of his face now, his head looks different. It's not so long and narrow anymore. Do you notice how now it looks more normal? It sort of looks like, in other words, what I'm saying is that if we could take this exact photo without altering it and put it next to the one in the trademark, I think it would really jump out at us now because you don't have that long Mr. Ed horse-like face that's so narrow. It looks more, it looks like the aspect ratio has kind of been normalized. So again, I really tip my hat to Wayne Matson for finding that. I think it's very, very compelling. And you can even see here that he's getting the beginning of the widow's peak. His hairline is starting to go back, and it was going to accelerate, and so that's just the way it went for him with his hair. But we can see it later in the other photos. Go ahead. All right, now this is the photo that Jim mentioned. On the left, we have this Antonio Veciana, and on the right, we're having this man who seems to be in the company of Rafael Cruz. And I have some other ones. I don't know if I sent them or not, but they also look pretty good as far as, you know, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And
I think this was a brilliant find, Ralph.
Yeah, and I like I said, I am really convinced that that there's just a very good probability that is him. And as Larry told me the other day, we know for a fact that there were many Cuban dissidents in the motorcade. And Larry, isn't it true that you said that some of them were even holding up anti-JFK signs?
Oh yeah, well, that's what we're going to talk about now to close the show. The way that these Cuban exiles were actually stalking JFK, you know, from one city to the next. Okay, and that's why our next slide is it's one that's going to just blow your minds away, because it talks about a letter that was received by the Miami police, and this was right at the time when JFK was supposed to speak in Miami, where apparently there was supposed to be a motorcade, and it was canceled at the last minute, and they transported him by helicopter or something like that. But this letter was received. This is a very rare letter, you know. This is dated, the postmark November 19, 1963, the weekend before when he was in Miami. And what it talks about, it's dated November 16. It's anonymous, obviously, and it talks about the Cuban commandos have the bombs ready for killing JFK and Mayor King High, either at the airport or at the convention hall. A Catholic padre is going to give instructions at the Cuban women's broadcast at 8:45 tonight on Radio Reloj, and then all are invited to dance at Bayfront Park Auditorium and take Bayfront Park Auditorium and take along a bottle of wine, whiskey, etc. to decide who will throw the bombs at King High, because he did sign the ordinance about taxi drivers being only American citizens and sending refugees away, etc. Mary, okay? Now, this is pretty overt here, you know, where they're talking about bombing JFK, in Miami, you know, and then as far as the stalking is concerned, if we go on to the next slide, we all know about Dark Complected Man, okay, who was sitting there, he was standing right next to Umbrella Man, and it's been narrowed down to two different people, either Felipe Vidal or Orlando Bosch. Okay, so everybody's got their different opinion on who that gentleman might have been, because he was obviously giving signs there at the curb to the shooters or whoever was in charge of the coordinated ambush there that JFK was.
I believe it was Felipe Vidal Santiago, and that his nose has been slightly altered in some of the photographs. Right.
So this particular spread here was published in Dateline Dallas in the early 90s, and if you look closely, Jack White prepared this, and if you look at this guy had been actually stalking JFK. If you look at the bottom right, and I'm going to show close-ups of this guy in the next couple of slides, he's shown there at Love Airfield, okay, in the crowd there, and he's on the tarmac, Jim, okay. So this guy.
I've never seen this stuff, Larry. Fascinating.
Okay, well, you know, hold on to your seats here, because later on at Parkland, this guy is photographed at Parkland Hospital wearing a couple of cameras, like he's, you know, playing the photographer type of thing. And he's there, casually looking at the crowd, you know, they're standing there at one of the limos. Okay. And so Jack White made the comparison with the man at the on Elm Street, you know, Dark Complected Man, as we have known to name this guy, and apparently it's the same guy. If you go on to the next slide, and I'm going to show you a close up of the photograph. This is the one at Love Field, and the red circle. You can see the beret, you know, the type of Che Guevara beret, who I think this might have been also making some kind of a statement here, you know. But he's there at Love Field, and like I said, you know, this guy is you know, he's got some kind of really good connections, because what is he doing there, right there on the tarmac, you know, right at Love Field. Okay, so the next slide shows obviously Dark Complected Man, you know, after the shooting, where he's sitting there. Right there, where he's this is from the Grant photograph, and he's sitting there, and apparently this is the same guy, you know. You know, he's got everything, you know, the beret, the glasses, the jacket, the white jacket, you know. And so the next slide, and this is the one at Parkland, and this is the same guy, you know, right there in the foreground. You can see him, you know, looking towards the crowd and, you know, taking in, you know, the scene there at Parkland Hospital. So, so this
That's very disturbing, Larry.
this guy was stalking. He was there, you know. So this follows, you know, what we were just talking about, that these Cubans had been stalking and following JFK from city to city, and now, after the deed is done, they all went squirreling, you know, their own different ways, you know, hiding, you know, the way Rafael Cruz went and hid in Calgary, you know, after the fact. Okay, so you know, I just wanted to show these, you know, and the next slide is from the actual article, and it talks about a little bit about, you know, the Umbrella Man, the Cuban, you know, have been a curious mystery to researchers of the assassination for years. Jack White of Fort Worth created a display. That's what we were just talking about. And so I was wondering if, had you ever heard about this, Jim? I mean, this whole thing with this Cuban, you know, the way that I presented him.
No, not that he was at Love Field, not that he was at the motorcade, and in Parkland, he was sitting on the steps beside the Umbrella Man, who were the only two who weren't acting like had no idea what was going on. They're the most calm, collected, just simply sit down and relax. Like,
That's right.
everything's happening according to plan.
And you know, he had a radio transmitter, walkie-talkie, in his back pocket, by the way, because we've seen photographs of him, you know, taken from behind, you know, and where he was part of the coordination, you know, of gunfire there at Dealey Plaza that day. And then, you know, apparently he had the connections, like I said, because he was at every relevant place. You know, the only place I don't think he ever was at the Tippett shooting, but, you know, who knows? Maybe he was there too.
Well, it's pretty bizarre any way you cut it.
Yeah.
You know, Jim, I know we don't have much time left, but let me just refer back, if you don't mind, to something you said earlier about, we were talking about the Lucian Conan figure and about how they tried to say that it was a guy named Robert
Adams,
the postal worker. Yeah. Well, I found images of him, and it turns out that his whole face looked nothing like that other guy. That they did what I said before. They actually used photography to change the aspect ratio, where they just reshaped his face.
Conan had a rounder face. He had a more oval face. There were several other features. Jack White nailed this.
Oh, he did?
Decades ago.
And I'll tell you something else. They messed with his eyes. They made his eyes look darker, like the figure. So it's a complete photographic sham when they tried to say that. And of course, we know that it's typical. We know that the JFK assassination is the most photographically altered event there ever was, that they altered everything they could get their hands on. But, you know, this idea of, you know, messing with that is something that they do. They do it now. They did it then. And I really think that in that one photo of Rafael Cruz, that they deliberately narrowed his face just to create distance and departure from the other figure. I sincerely believe that. Yes. And then for the unwary, they present the altered photograph and say, how could anyone become so confused and think these were the photographs of the same person? Right.
Well, this is the final slide. You know, I just wanted to make a quick comment on what the Cuban exile community thinks about Man in the Doorway. And the actual name of the file, I found this at one of the exile websites, you know, where they have a lot of pictures and photographs. And to the right, it says LHO-TSBD 1963 November, and the name of the file.
I've identified him as Lee Harvey Oswald.
Exactly.
Ralph, I want you to take this opportunity just to talk about this image, since you've done so much on it. I think your work has been just...
Well, thank you very much, Jim. You know, the way I feel about it is that in this day and age, with all the work that we've done, and, you know, speaking for myself and Larry and Dennis, that it's just complete denialism to say that isn't Oswald. I mean, we have a perfect match of not only the man, but the clothing. I mean, it is so mathematically expansive when you
not only that's Lee, Ralph, but that beside him holding his hands up to shade his eyes is Billy Lovelady. I mean, how... You know, Billy said he thought it was...
That is Billy Lovelady, who is visoring his eyes with his hand. And keep in mind that there's nothing photographically legitimate about his entire face being blackened. In fact, let's think about this humorously for a moment. There was so much light streaming into this man's face, blinding his eyes, that he had to bring his hands up in order to block some of the light.
Right.
And yet we're supposed to believe that the result was that his entire face was blackened out.
I know. And you proved it, Ralph, with your reenactment.
Right. Yeah, the reenactment proved it as well. But
remember how Billy said that he thought it was odd they'd be confused because he was 2 to 3 inches shorter than Lee and 15 to 20 pounds heavier, exactly as we see of this person in relation to Lee Oswald. And of course, he's wearing the short sleeve, red and white, vertically striped shirt. He took to the FBI when they asked him to come in wearing the shirt he'd been wearing during the motorcade.
Now, what I'm thinking is that they did something to remove the stripes from the shirt.
Absolutely.
Looks was, gleaming
Absolutely.
white.
Yeah.
But I think that was very easily done. They had no problem doing it. In fact, here's what I really think. Remember how small this was in the entire Alchin's photo. When they whited out his striped shirt, and then they, of course, put the white obfuscation over the face of Obfuscated Man, the result was that from a distance, if you were looking at the whole photo, that it basically just looked like that was all of him. In other words, all you're seeing is the white, and it looks like it's his shirt, and you really don't see Obfuscated Man at all. You only really can pick him out in these enlarged crops, but in the entire photo, he sort of disappears, and that was the whole idea. Larry, who is it that you think Obfuscated Man was?
Oh, that's Otis Williams.
Otis Williams.
They're very short, very pudgy man. You can see the gut and everything. And I have to credit, because you got to give credit where credit is due. The people that did Prayer Man, the Prayer Man video, really steered me to change my assessment. I had thought that was Joe Molina. And a lot of times you just have to admit, when you're wrong. I was wrong.
Okay.
And it's very obvious to me because of the how short he was. I later on, out of when Sloan's book, about the witnesses, he's got very good pictures in there, and of Otis Williams, and they match perfectly. Now, yeah. So
let me say this, Jim, if we have time, that lately. I've had a strong focus on the idea, as radical as it sounds, that the whole book distributing business at the book depository was just a front, just a complete sham. I'm convinced of it now. I've suspected it before, but I'm completely convinced of it
Ralph,
now.
you're making excellent points about it. I mean, it's so disorganized. You just have these boxes. If these were actually books, you'd have to know what books were in the boxes. They'd have to be
the whole thing is ridiculous. There is
shelves. They'd have to be very easily identified.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we don't have anything legible in those boxes. There was a guy named Troy West. He was an African-American man, a slender, kind of a little guy. And supposedly, he was the whole shipping department. So you had all these order fillers who were gathering up books, bringing them to him. And do you know what he called himself? He called himself the mail wrapper. He didn't say he was the shipper. He said, I wrapped the mail. And he said that he would wrap it in paper. He would wrap these loose books in paper, and then he would tape it up and put a string on it. In other words, he would do it the way Grandma would send a fruitcake at Christmas time. And this was for a big company that had 75 employees, all these clerical workers. They had a whole second floor that was full of people at desks doing stuff. And yet you had one shipper who could handle the whole load. And apparently he never shipped a whole box of books. I mean, here their customers were supposedly schools, not individuals, not families, but schools. Schools ordering textbooks for classes. And yet it was all small bundles, a few books, wrap it up, tape it up, string it up. And they never actually shipped a whole book. I mean, a whole box of books. So again, I think the whole thing about the book distributing was a ruse. But the reason why I thought of it is because we were talking about Joe Molina. And, Joe Molina was very active in this GI Forum, which was supposed to be like a kind of a rights organization for Hispanic veterans.
That's right.
And I have to wonder if really what he was doing was just infiltrating, and because they were wanting to determine if there were any leftist communist elements, in these various.
That was with a shoe salesman, undercover agent by the name of Bill Lowry, and he had infiltrated the Communist Party in that area. And the connection with Joe is obvious, okay, where they were both infiltrating, the Communist Party in one way or another. And then later on, he was subpoenaed, and he had to, tell it the way it was, that he was an agent, and he was very good friends with Joe Molina. So that's why there's always been that suspicion about him.
Now, isn't it true that Joe Molina was supposed to have been in the doorway?
That's right. And that's
So
right.
where do you think he was, and why don't we see him?
I have him pegged as Black Tie Man. Shirley Martin went to see him, and she asked him where he was and she showed him the Alton's photograph, and he pointed at Black Tie Man right behind Lee Oswald, and he said that was him.
That might be Joe Molina. Well,
But,
like I said,
Larry,
I know that when asked, Joe Molina refused to say who he recalled was in the doorway.
Well, Larry, look, remember, Black Tie Man has to be an insertion because he's overlapping Lee Oswald's left shoulder.
Jim, I believe that very strongly, but it's possible that they got him from somewhere else and sort of snugged him in there. I mean, it might have been that he was elsewhere.
I'd be dumbfounded if that's Joe Molina. That appears to me to be a transfer of an image, probably from the left here.
Well, the problem is that it's so crude. It is so.
He identified himself to Shirley Martin. I have the documents that show.
Oh, but wait a second, Larry. Are you saying that he identified himself as that figure?
That's right.
All right. Well, I would very much like to see that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I have the document.
All right.
Larry, do we have photographs of Joe Molina? Does he look anything like Black Tie Man?
Well, yes, I do. There's only one photograph that came out for the 25th observance in the Dallas Morning News. I have that. It's a very good photograph, but you can't really make any comparison because you can't see anything.
No, it's a photographically inadequate image. But while we're talking about these things, I also want to reiterate my opinion, which I've had for many years now, that the figure in the fedora hat on our left is very likely Jack Ruby. I am still convinced. Again, I'm not going to say I'd bet my life on it, but
obfuscated by the hat on the little boy, right?
Well, the thing I noticed about this picture that that most people probably wouldn't notice is that I am from the mechanics of his angle, I am convinced that we're actually looking at the back of him and that we're seeing the back of his hat and that he's actually facing Oswald and looking at Oswald, which is why they had to cover it up. But I don't believe that he's, you see, if you look above, and it's not easy to see, but if you look above the wool hat of the boy, and keep in mind that at that time in Dealey Plaza, it was either 70 degrees or hotter. It was at that moment, it was a warm, sunny situation.
Right. The wool hat doesn't make any sense.
The hat does not make any sense.
But it started the morning. It started cold and drizzly.
Right. It was cold and drizzly. But you know something? He would have removed his hat by this point. Little kids are like biological furnaces. They have such good circulation that the heat gets everywhere. He would have been very uncomfortable at 70 degrees to have a wool hat on, not just on, but pulled down over his ears. But the thing I wanted to say is that if you look above his wool cap, you see what looks like a kind of like a bronzed area before it gets to the black rim of the hat. And in fact, one person suggested that it's the forehead and that it was a black-skinned man, that maybe he was African-American. But I don't think so. I think that that's the ribbon of his hat, and he's facing the other way. He's actually, so we're seeing his back, we're seeing the back of his hat. He's facing Oswald, and that's why they had to cover that up. But let's remember something, that Jack Ruby was everywhere. He was at Parkland. He was at the homicide division when Oswald was led there after his arrest. He was at the midnight press conference. He was in the hallway when Curry was being interviewed and even corrected Curry. Curry said something, he didn't say fair play for Cuba committee right. He gave a different term for it. And Jack Ruby corrected him. Do you know that? That when Jesse Curry was being interviewed by a reporter, that Jack Ruby corrected him and said, no,
fair play for
Cuba committee.
Yeah.
All right, so Jack Ruby's everywhere.
He mistakenly said it was the Free Cuba Committee. Yeah. Ralph, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely sensational. Larry, Gary, Gary, you can take us out with a closing remark, but I'm really grateful to Ralph for his contributions tonight. Thank you so very much.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we very much had the best of the best when it comes to leading the doorway. You have Ralph Cinque, you've got Larry Rivera, who's #1 in the new JFK research. We've got the granddaddy of them all, Jim Fetzer. We've got Chance George in the engineer's chair, so how can you go wrong? We'll see you next week. We've got a great show lined up for you.
Thank you, Gary. Good night, everybody. Thank you.